Hello, this is Professor Mike Labasi for St. Clair Community College, and we're looking at Malware Forensics from my CIS 2808 Introduction to Forensics class. This is from the CHFI, the EC Council CHFI content. At the time of the recording, this is Module 14, which is aligned to week 14 or Topic 14 and a 16-week course. It is Volume 4, Chapter 2, and we're going to take a look at. Now, this is a very deep topic. You can almost have an entire 12-week course or more on this because there's some really deep areas. So, but we're going to explore the forensics part of it. It definitely applies. And first off, we're going to start with some things that I talk about, of course, is what's the context of the investigation? This is an incident response, maybe at a like a DevOps, DevSecOps at a corporation or institution. More about just containing and finding how something got into the system. Could it was in a spam email, things like that. So this topic, when it comes to that part, this will reach out into many of those previous things we talked about. Of course, email forensics, database forensics, um, investigating email crimes. So this could reach out into some of those. So I'm of course not going to try to cover those topics, but just keep that in mind. This is definitely a lot of overlap, especially when it comes to that incident response part. And one of the most important things, of course, is to have procedures in place to isolate and contain and then recover from any kind of malware infection. So that's usually called cyber resilience. And this is definitely where there's some overlap between the cybersecurity side and the forensic side. There's always been overlap. People just don't realize it, especially on the corporate side. You're dealing with the ability to find out what happened and can we fix it so it doesn't happen again. Now we look more into malware investigation, maybe more of the criminal side. Again, it could be corporate institution side where you need to dig deeper. But of course, you understand what malware is. So understanding also the context of the attack. Um, so that, of course, goes in the context. What was the attack? What was the attack vector? So we're digging back in some cybersecurity terms. How did the attack come in? Was it a browser? Was it a link in an email? That might help you identify what type of malware it is. Keep in mind, a lot of times malware comes in two parts. There usually is a stager, or a loader. Um, this usually is a small piece. It could be a fetch URL. Maybe it's a link. This will go out and fetch to some sort of, usually something in the cloud container. It's a really bad looking cloud. Um, and execute and pull down the actual malware. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes you're not going to find all the code inside of the original email. It's because usually it gets scanned. So kicking word chat, fake programs, free software. That's a good one. So you see a lot of times downloading games from untrusted sites. so part of this is, of course, is the ability to track what was happening uh, when the malware attack happened. So so it's almost the preamble part. So not just okay, someone downloaded something. Where they downloaded it from? What was the URL? Or the email came in. When did the email come in? When was it opened? Who got the email? So there's some preamble to look at, sort of to set up how the attack happened. Now, when it comes down to actual malware itself, like understanding malware, virus forms, Trojans, ransomware is a huge one. So just understand what you're dealing with, what you might be looking for. Uh, Payload itself, of course, but how to come in malicious code, fileless malware. That's a big one right there, fileless malware. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So again, I think I've already stepped over the slide a little bit. Determine what's going, what exactly happened, what was the intent of the malware, and then look for some indicators of compromise. So it could be on a server, it could be on a specific client, it could be on a mobile device, and then identify the exploit vulnerability. Try to find out where the code's at. I don't think you're going to catch the perpetrator, but you might be able to at least hopefully seal up the attack vector from that. So what kind of challenges do we have here? Well, of course, big one, of course, is reinfection. This is probably somewhere in the slide. If you have a device, a laptop, desktop, maybe a file system from a cloud, a mobile device, um, the chance of they call it reigniting, reignition, or re-executing the malware is always a huge deal. So, chapter talks about further down the challenges of creating, of course, a secure lab. They talk about using virtual machines, which is a great way to do that. Virtualization is a great tool for this. Of course, and not just on fiber virtual machine, have the like host-only network, very sealed off. Um, and you go into how you're going to go and identify and extract the malware. So again, um, before we move into the types of analysis, I realize um, suspicious activity has been reported. It's important to realize what that activity was. Errors, again, is what happened beforehand. Here's that word again, logs. I can't say as much. Logs are a huge deal. But you'll look at how you can, this chapter will look at how ways to go ahead and investigate either from a static side or dynamic side of the malware. So, um, and also this chapter goes into, I jumped over a bunch of these slides, all kinds of tools, and there's a lot of them. We'll talk about a couple of them, I think, here. Very important. So, preparing your test bed. Allocate a physical system for the analysis. Have a specific system. Don't even if you're running virtual machines, if at all possible, the lab should have a dedicated system and maybe dedicated small network with a couple of systems that are run the guest VMs as virtual machines. You need to be aware that you don't underestimate the fact that it could get out. You don't want to spread it and take the entire lab down. Um, Definitely a huge deal. So you can see the slide talks about that. Disable shared folders, disable guest isolate. Don't turn on guest access, NIC card host only, and the machine itself should probably physical system should probably be detached from any network. And don't forget about the old good old Wi-Fi too. It's not always wired. Um, so some general rules again. We're looking for key features from the malware. That could be opening. Did it try to open a certain port? Um, did it try to delete files? Did it try to encrypt them? Understanding what the attack was, what happened. Again, this comes from the report. Of course, if a system's got ransomware, that's pretty obvious. But sometimes it could be a lot more stealthier. So there's different tools you might use to approach this, different analysis approaches. So this is really what it comes down to, and this is the big one here. It's static analysis or dynamic analysis. So stack, of course, both these specific and dynamic really should be, dynamic is definitely used within a sealed system. It's called behavioral analysis. But first, though, stack analysis is how it sounds. It's having the unran or they always called it when I went to a stack. I went to a malware analysis class. It's like a 3-day class, and they call it detonating the malware. I thought it was a funny term, but it's unran code. So it's usually, of course, going to be executable binary. You want to go ahead and, at all possible, disassemble it. And we'll look at that right there. IDA Pro is one of the big ones here. So we'll talk about that. The dynamic, of course, is running in the malware, actually running it and seeing the before and after. So those are the two approaches there. For stack analysis, it's really about collecting information about the piece of malware. And that can start off with search strings and hashing. And I think one of the linked things talks about, this is one of the linked articles in the lesson activities. But strings are a fantastic way. Also, just looking at the hexadecimal. You can't find too much from this, but what strings does is it goes through a binary file, any binary file, and it will pull out any ASCII strings. It's a great way to maybe get information. It could be an IP address, a Bitcoin wallet, an error message, a comment. Unfortunately, some producers of malware they love to leave their own signature on there. Um, Something could be of value in there. It may seem benign, maybe like maybe just a weird comment. That weird comment though could be seen in other malware of different types. It might lead to a specific um, group or person. So you can see here's an example of strings. Sometimes it's going to be just a bunch of text, but still, that's a fantastic analysis. We're doing like a metadata analysis of the file. Next, of course, is going to be hashes. Again, you can see here MD5 sum of this malware.exe. You take that hash, and usually you want to do a couple different hashes. Here you can see SHA1 and SHA256. So very common. This should be no surprise. You've been running hashes as part of a way to verify evidence. In this case, you're going to use it to collect a signature of this malware exe, and you send something like virus total. This is a fantastic site, by the way. Um, and you can upload that hash. The hash itself will tell you what the possible virus is. So this is a great way to quickly narrow down if this has been seen before in the wild and it's been reported to virus total, um, what it might be. And you can see here it's behavior detection. The behavior is great. So detection, things like that. So fantastic thing. And you do this in the lab itself. So if I try to do a demo video, we'll do that. But string search, and then we get more into actually diving into the executable. So we get into stack analysis. Again, we talked about binary code, hash calculators. Great way. Strings, pull strings out. There's actually a resource extract tool here in Windows. Looks like um, fantastic tool. Looking for ASCII and Unicode formats. But we move into the next part. And that's actually where we start touching the exe. Get into it. And one, of course, is looking at the PE. So Windows uses something called PE analysis, or it's portable executable. And there's ways to see the headers, directories. You can see here, looking from like PE Studio, it's going to give you the hashes, which is great. So right off the bat, you can take those hashes and send those to virus total. You can see what kind of CPU it is, the compiler stamp, and some information might show you the compile date time. So again, we're getting information about link libraries, icons, um, stuff about the executable, and that's what the PE analysis is going to be. Now, dive deeper in, then we get into disassembly. This is where it gets very deep. And I'll be honest, I ran through this. We had a one-day session on this using something called IDA Pro. And there's a free version of this. I think I actually used this in the lab. This gets really deep. Um, you need guidance with this. I need guidance with it too. Unless you do this full time, IDA Pro can be a little overwhelming. So when you do the lab though, walk through the lab document. I think actually you do IDA Pro in one of the labs. But realize you're looking at uncompiled code, and it's uncompiled to assembly. So something that I've only dabbled in. I think I read a Hello World in assembly once on my Raspberry Pi and looked at some assembly when I took that course. So just keep that in mind. After you finish the lab, after you go through the text, and you look at IDA Pro, realize this is not going to be an easy thing. There's an entire thing for this. So anyways, that's all. That's what I said. This is one of those things where top level collecting metadata about information about the attack, definitely part of any forensics program. It can be with anything. But when you get down to some of these things, you get a very, very deep analysis. Another big one, of course, is also looking at Office documents. Now, at the time of this recording, I think there was a post saying they're going to Microsoft's going to remove VBA macros from Office. This, of course, has been one of the major attack vectors, but it's easy to set up, and it's easier to have someone open a document and maybe allow macros to run versus trying them to run an executable file, which actually might trigger more of endpoint protection. So this might go by the wayside, but don't assume because Microsoft someday removes that from a certain version of Windows 11, let's say, or a certain version of Office. Don't ever assume that the victim is always on the latest and greatest software. And again, it's an important reason why when you collect all the information about the attack, it could be what versions you're running of what version of Office, or what kind of email client we're using. But there's a way to do this. This is using OLEID, so this is part of the lab. There's a few Python and some other things I've seen you can run. We ran a Python script that would just basically dive in. Basically it's XML when you do in kind of docx, and we can extract from the XML if it has VBA macros or not. If it does, you can go in and see the macro and actually look at, in this case, we're looking at the hexadecimal bit, but is it doing it? In this case, it's doing a URL download. And here it is right there, Python OLE dump. Yep, that's what we did in our class too. And you can see the macro itself. And one of the course the biggest things is especially with VBA level attacks, MS Office attacks, is you're not going to have any binary in there. It's going to have a call out to um, to download the actual and run the actual the bytecode. So another one, of course, is PDFs. And you can see here PDFs, actually string extraction. So um, so some great stuff here in that. So let's see. So again, yeah, PDF dumper. There's a bunch of ways. Again, I don't want to go into every single approach here that the lab's going to do, but you can see how stack analysis can work. Um, both just high level, collecting metadata, going very deep, IDA Pro, reverse engineering the malware and assembly, and also extracting information from Office documents. And each of those has different approaches there, so different tool sets. Now, that dynamic, this is where it definitely gets a lot more trickier. You're actually going to set up an environment, and you're going to get basically a pre and post snapshot after malware has ran. And there's a few things to look at here. So, of course, is the host integrity and the runtime behavior and post integrity. So we're looking at, let's talk about Windows. Registry changes before and after. So pre-execution, it talks about what to do, prepare, get your hash of all your stuff, list Windows services, a snapshot of the registry keys, and events, files. So this is definitely this is a very involved process. And if you miss any one of these, you got to go back and start again. So you can guess a virtual machine is great because you can take, after you get done, you create a snapshot of the virtual machine. You have all the information about it. You can always roll back to that previous snapshot and start again. So, but the pre-steps there's a very involved series of pre-steps here, involve certain tools to capture information. You run it, and what does it do? So again, registry analysis for Windows is probably one of the top ones. What keys were changed? Run once keys, startup keys. We're looking for things that are added. Also, startup programs. Um, in either drivers could be added. There are ways to create infected. Example, I was on a team, we did an infected control panel item. But you install some apps, they will install control panel applets. So there's a lot of places this stuff can end up here. And of course, what type of, oh, then I know I skipped over the slide. I think I missed the slide bookmark here. But also logs, no surprise, logs before and after. All the new log entries showing what was modified, installed, ran, if it's likely to run when the services MSC was ran, what service was started up. Find the service, see what files it's dependent upon. And of course, the last part of this is network. So a lot of times this malware is going to do something. Now, if this malware is intended to only destroy the system, there might not be any calls out, but you're looking for, again, from our system, let's look out, we'll look for things like DNS calls. Definitely look for API calls. DNS is going to be one of the big ones. But we're looking for is also what is coming in. So what ports are open? So a port map of the system. Is there a new port open? Was there a new executable using a certain port? Did an exe use like port 80 or 443? Very two common ports. These of course are HTTP and HTTPS. Almost every system on every network always has those open because of our way we work, right? We work in the cloud. So if it's not a new port, is there a new port that's being, an existing port that's now being utilized? So example, you can open a netcat listener on port 443, and that is going to be indicative of a backdoor. So look for this, in this case, netcat.exe. It's using an existing port, or is it a new port? So those are going to be those high-level ports. So look at our port stack, which are the high level, like the the very bottom tier of our port stack. Remember, we have ports 0 to 35,355, I think. Um, the low end of this, the higher the number of ports. These are the more dynamic ports. They're opened up and closed as needed. So, so that's the other thing to do is also look at the indirection, what came in. And it could be, I mean, netcat port, it could be a download. So the DNS will tell us where it went to. It could be an API call, and the API call might actually pull down some executable code. So on that executable code, we're going to wrap it up here with the last part. And it leads us to fireless malware. Not everything is going to be loaded and set on disk because if you can avoid writing to disk, you can avoid, of course, avoid having any endpoint protection. Now, uh, things like Microsoft's Defender is kind of really good at looking for even memory-based or fileless programs, but really not everything's going to have a file. So a system memory snapshot, and this is definitely going to be indicative of a more dynamic analysis because you're not going to be able to find this unless there's a memory dump taken of the client. So, and that goes back to, of course, Windows and Mac. Forensics, back to our older, higher up our chain with memory forensics. So, data acquisition duplication. So I think Windows was memory. If it's possible it's in there, you can look for it, but it's just something you might look for in a dynamic environment where you actually execute the malware and see what it was trying to do. And there's sort of a chain here of fileless malware. I'm not gonna go through all this. This is in the textbook, but it's a great way to see how persistence works. There's still registry entries made sometimes, and some management infrastructure is made up sometimes, or scheduled tasks is set up to run this. So it's hard not to touch disk sometimes, but realize that it might be no exe code staying on disk. So, anyways, for the summary here, um, again, walk away from this thing knowing that we're looking at, of course, the actual context of the attack, the systems in play, and also all the preliminary stuff. Who did what happened, did someone click on something? Um, Having a lab set up properly, especially if you're dealing with malware, is crucial. And of course, the types of analysis, static and dynamic, um, static can, both these of course have the metadata collection, strings, hashing, virus totals is going to be your number one go-to. You start diving into things like stack analysis with IDA Pro, actual assembly language level stuff, it gets pretty deep. So if you're with a large team, hopefully there's someone there specialized who's been trained with IDA Pro or some other type of tool, similar tool, and has some level of assembly language knowledge, know how to track down what it was doing. But the stack analysis also is going to tell you what was where it's compiled, when it was compiled, what type of icons, things like that. Again, even the metadata about that binary. Dynamic also whole nother approach. It's going to be a huge setup, and it's very tricky to pull off. But that also is another one to look at. So, in case that wraps it up for this module, and thanks for watching.